Hey nerds! Project Hail Mary is recently out on streaming, and while I have already made a video about the science of the film, I wanted to do a proper review of it. Now, I've been titling this playlist here like Sci-Fi review, and I don't know if that fully describes what I mean. There are like loads of people who review films from a filmmaking perspective, and I am not a professional reviewer or a critic. What I am interested in is the science fiction, like how science is used and represented, how the story explores science and culture. But I also don't want to just call it like a science review, because that's like a bit boring. I need my own term for what I'm doing, but I don't know what to call it. I don't know why I did that voice, but if you have suggestions, I will take them. Basically, I am saying all of this because I just want to caveat what I'm trying to do with these review videos, as I am not trying to tell you what to like, I am not trying to tell you what to enjoy, and I am just telling you how I felt about it from a scientist and science communicator's perspective. If you are new here, I'm Abby, I'm a physicist, and I make videos about the science in science fiction. So if you'd love to learn about the real physics behind warp drives, artificial gravity, or multiverses, then please do subscribe. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back. Drop a comment with your thoughts on Project Hail Mary now. Book or movie, or both.
The sun is not the only star dying. Every star was infected by its neighbor, except one.
Why?
We don't know.
There seems to be this general consensus that many people loved Project Hail Mary, and there's this even stronger consensus that people absolutely adore the book. Now, my honest opinion on the book, and this might surprise some people, is that I liked it, but it was only okay for me. Like, I did enjoy reading it more than I enjoyed reading The Martian, though. Now I want to explain why. Sci-fi has so many different styles and types of stories, and we are all going to engage with them in very different ways. That also changes over time. Our moods change, our interests change, and what we want from fiction will change. I am at a point in my life right now where I have been studying physics for about 13 years. I am at the end of my PhD and I am saturated with textbook physics. I also spend so much of my free time researching topics and then making science explainer videos for YouTube. So my capacity for reading science being explained to me for pleasure is very low. And I only really realized this recently. Since I've been studying, and like more specifically since I've been doing my PhD, I seem to have leaned so much more towards like classic science fiction. That's my escapism right now, like Philip K. Dick, Ray Bradbury, Asimov. Then on the other side of it though, if I am reading modern sci-fi, I kind of tend to prefer something that's like really out there, like something completely batshit. Cheech and Liu. Like, what I just don't personally find relaxing is having science explained to me. Which is weird, I know, I hear it as I'm saying it because I make videos explaining science to other people. So I suppose when somebody comes across my video and gets annoyed, I can go, okay, listen, I understand. But this is not about me feeling like I don't need this explained to me. That's not the attitude I'm saying here. It isn't that. I love that Andy Weir puts the science into his books, and I love that people resonate with it. I think that this book and this movie being so popular can genuinely help with science literacy. Whether every single piece of the science is accurate is a completely separate argument. What matters to me is the process. Basically, if we think about Watney on Mars and then, like, you know, Hail Mary full of grace, there's a problem, they have to solve it. Then we go through the thinking with them as the audience. Like, what do they know? What tools do they have? What can they test? What happens if that doesn't work? That's what Andy Weir is very good at, and it helps that his characters are also so skilled. But there's also a clear and believable reason for this. Like, Watney can science the shit out of Mars because he is a trained astronaut. He has to be capable across multiple areas. He has to have the psychological capacity to handle the situation and the technical skills to solve engineering problems. People seemed to find Grace less believable because he's a science teacher, but most of the science that he does aboard the ship is around the level of what he teaches as a science teacher. Like, a lot of the little problems that he solves, it all comes down to fundamental science and using the basic tools properly. You do not need over-the-top graduate level physics for every problem, although Grace does have graduate level knowledge when it comes to astrobiology. So I can completely understand why people love the book, and I appreciate that it exists, and I appreciate what it is doing and what people get from it. I just personally did not find it especially relaxing to read. But what I do think is that Andy Weir is very good at creating stories and settings that easily translate to the screen. The Martian, while I didn't enjoy reading that book, is one of the best movies ever made. It is my go-to comfort movie, and I think Project Hail Mary is easily another optimistic comfort movie. It has this positive ending. You can just like throw it on and enjoy it. It's got visual spectacle, engaging scenes, and in this we've got that really lovely relationship between Grace and Rocky. So even though the book was only okay for me, the film gave me the parts of the story that I responded to most without asking me to spend quite so long reading the science explanations.
Ron, Grace, I just woke up from a coma. I'm several light years from my apartment.
Now, there have been a number of complaints from people who are unhappy with how much the film cut from the book. But we always get this with adaptations. We really do need to start remembering that different mediums require different kinds of storytelling. An adaptation is supposed to tell the story in a different way. It is also going to be the vision of the person who is adapting it. They're not making every directorial screenwriting or visual choice based on what they think is going to satisfy you personally. We are all subjective. No one is ever going to make a perfect adaptation that matches exactly what every single reader imagined. And let's be real, a direct page-to-screen adaptation is impossible for pretty much anything. The page is designed to help you create the visuals in your own mind. It brings you through the story and it gives you the material to imagine it for yourself. The screen is doing something entirely different. It's taking the bones of the story and then trying to evoke the feeling of it through the performances and the design, the pacing, all of the visuals and those that the particular creators think that it deserves. Now, different creators are going to make different choices about how that works. And I think this adaptation in particular made very good choices for the film that it wanted to be.
You are the only scientist who might know what this is.
Now, the biggest complaint that I saw seemed to be that they left out a lot of the science. In this case, people think that they dumbed it down. But you actually can't include every science explanation from the book and still have something that works as a film. You also want it to be distinct from The Martian. Now, that relied heavily on Watney's video records to provide all of this science exposition. He could use it to tell you everything he was doing. They can't just do the same thing with Project Hail Mary. But I also think that some of the cuts are connected to the very specific tone that they chose for the movie. Like, The Martian was very clearly a science story about survival. Project Hail Mary was a story about redemption, sacrifice, and friendship based in a science environment. Now, you can dislike that choice. We all have free will. You can dislike the tone. You can dislike the feel of the movie. That is entirely fair. But you have to look at what the film was trying to do and whether that missing material would actually have belonged in the film that they made. I think the adaptation understood what needed to stay at the center: Grace, Rocky, and the relationship between them. Now, in saying that, there are still a few things from the book that I personally missed. The main one was probably the Taumiba section. I just think that we got to the danger of the breakout maybe a little bit too quickly without properly understanding how the Taumiba was escaping. And I think I could have done with Grace and Rocky working on that together maybe a little bit more. It would have helped the audience understand the difference between the xenonite containment cells and the normal materials that Grace has available aboard the ship. So I personally would have liked slightly more science and explanation there. But I also understand why the film compressed it, because on screen, I think it probably risked feeling like the same dramatic situation happening multiple times. Like the Taumiba escapes, they clean everything out, and then it escapes again. So I missed the explanations, but I can see the possible narrative reasoning. I also missed the bit where Grace tries to rescue Rocky, like by basically smoking him out or like flushing him out. I would have enjoyed seeing that. I would have enjoyed seeing him trying to do more in that moment to save Rocky. It's an interesting arc or an interesting scene or setup in the book, but again, the film already had like a lot of different problems for them to solve, and not every problem from the book can become a full sequence on screen. But there is one big science explanation that I wish that they had kept, and it's in the section where Rocky learns about relativity. You see, Grace is explaining what has happened, but in the book, rather than it just being about time dilation, which was what we always talk about, Weir makes it about length contraction. So Rocky's discussing about how as they're approaching, Tau Ceti appeared to be closer to them, but as they decelerated, it was moving further away, and he just couldn't understand why. Now, the reason is because just as time is stretched and squeezed when you travel at relativistic velocities, so is space. So distances will appear differently depending on your velocity. I really enjoyed that because, like I said, length contraction just doesn't get discussed anywhere near as often as time dilation when we're talking about relativity in science fiction. But I also understand that in order to explain that on the screen for an audience without it sounding like some random lecture probably just wouldn't have worked. Now, I do want to bring up one change that they made that I did not particularly like. When Grace says that he is on a one-way trip because he doesn't have enough fuel to return home, Rocky offers to give him the fuel. But giving Grace that fuel means Rocky's own journey home will take something like another 7 years, I think it was. In the book, that is not how it happens. Rocky's people have brought an enormous amount of fuel because their ship is absolutely massive. Grace tells Rocky how much fuel he needs to get home, and Rocky's basically like, I got loads, you can have it. Like, why are you even worried about that? It's a funny bit in the book that I really enjoyed, and I feel like the film changed it because they wanted Rocky to make this obvious sacrifice for Grace. And then when Grace later decides to turn around and go back for Rocky, it creates this idea that Rocky has sacrificed for Grace and now Grace is sacrificing for Rocky. But I just don't think that was necessary. Rocky already risked himself to save Grace's life. They had already bonded. We didn't need Rocky to prove that he cared by also sacrificing years of his journey home. And I don't think Grace needed that extra reason to turn around. Their relationship had already done the work, in my opinion, but maybe I only think that because I'd read the book and I understood it more than somebody watching this for the first time. So maybe the filmmakers felt the audience needed this emotional logic made more explicit. I don't think that they needed to, but I would love to know what other people's opinions or thoughts were on that, because I think that it also, like, that scene also added a little bit to like that beautiful thing that we used to have, or that is a throughout in the book of just Rocky just being like, why are you so stupid, Grace? Why so dumb? But there are a few things particularly about the movie that I did really, really like. Now, I was really happy with the portrayal of Rocky and how the relationship developed. The film needed to make you care about the two of them together, and it absolutely did that for me, hands down. But I also just like loved being inside the world. Like the whole time I was watching it, all I could think about, and some people are going to have a reaction to this, but this was the first time something had felt like 2001: A Space Odyssey to me. Now, you might think that that's because 2001 is classed as one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time, and I'm making this grand statement. I didn't particularly love that movie. I love parts of it. Other parts of it I think are batcrap insane, and I'm sitting there going like, what the hell is going on here? But the central science fiction parts of 2001, I absolutely adore. I think Discovery 1 might be my favorite spaceship in all of science fiction. I love all of the scenes on that ship, and I love the feeling of it, and Project Hail Mary gave me a similar feeling. Like, it doesn't look the same. I'm not saying that. It doesn't need to copy 2001 visually in any way. It just has a certain atmosphere, if that makes sense. Now, another thing that I really love is, of course, the Hail Mary. I am a big fan of functional spaceships that make sense, and I particularly loved the cockpit. I thought the design was so clever and it was so pleasing to just look at it. I liked him like flipping around in his chair. I also really like the visual room with all of the screens that are there for like the mental health aspect to give Grace like something closer to a normal environment. I also really enjoyed like the visuals of the spin drive working. And we had this like beautiful 0G to centrifuge shots as well that I just thought were really great and gave like just a lot of fun stuff to look at on the screen. And then, of course, because I love spaceships, Rocky's spaceship. It was something beautiful. And something that they added that I felt that we and the character deserved was letting Grace go aboard Rocky's ship. Like all of the glimmers of light coming through the xenonite shards. It was so visually satisfying and it was so perfectly alien in an entirely new way. Giving him his little xenonite spacesuit as well so that he could go inside was just such a good choice because it let us properly see and experience that environment. It was just absolutely stunning. Now, something else as well is that I honestly do think that Ryan Gosling was the perfect casting for Ryland Grace. I genuinely immediately thought, perfect. Like, you just knew he could do it because we know that he is a very good dramatic actor and we know he can play emotion really well, but we also know that he is very good at comedy and Grace needs both of those things. Also, I just want to side note here and say that The Fall Guy was criminally underappreciated as a movie. That is an incredible movie and we should watch that and talk about that. I love that so much. Anyway, Gosling has to carry a lot of the film by himself and he also has to make like the scientific problem solving engaging but be funny and slightly awkward without turning Grace into some sort of comedy caricature or like overall genius. And if you'd read the book, you also knew where Grace's character arc was going. Like you knew that we were eventually going to learn or find out that he had refused to go on the mission and that Strat had him drugged and put aboard the ship anyway. Now, when I read the book first, like I remember not realizing how much I had started thinking of Grace as a hero. Like I'd been thinking of him as that Watney character until that revelation happened. And it changed how I felt about him. Honestly, I remember feeling really disappointed in him because we had developed, or like it had caused me to develop this relationship with him throughout the book. But what you also realize, and I think portrayed better on screen, is that Grace was also disappointed in himself. That's the beautiful difference between Grace and Watney. Watney was this trained astronaut. He had trained to do that mission. He was chosen for it. He made a conscious, consensual decision to accept the risk. Grace was just the person who happened to be in the right place and knew enough of the science to be like a logical choice. Like scientifically, he was the logical choice for the mission. But psychologically, he was not prepared in any way to handle what he was being asked to do.
Who on earth is going to sign up for this? I'm not an astronaut.
He wasn't an astronaut. He hadn't spent years training for the possibility that he might die in space. He was a science teacher, being told that he had to leave the Earth, fly into another solar system, and then die alone. And I can understand that that must have been terrifying. Now, when I reread the book, I didn't feel the same disappointment in him because I understood him a little bit more. And it's very easy to imagine that you would just like volunteer yourself when the question is hypothetical, like I'll save the human race. But if somebody actually stood in front of you right now and said, okay, we need you to go into space and die to save everyone else, you would probably like freak out. Absolute terror. Like I can't even imagine it. We're just normal people. And I think Ryan Gosling did an incredible job of showing the reaction of just a normal person. Like, Grace is very capable. He knows a lot. He's good at using the scientific process to solve problems. But it's not like he's some cold genius who just exists outside of ordinary human emotions. He's scared, he panics, he gets things wrong, he becomes emotionally attached to Rocky. He's affected by guilt and by what he learns about himself. And none of that makes him any less of a scientist. Because scientists are people too. We are not machines, you guys. We don't just produce the correct answers because the story needs them to explain something. Grace has knowledge and a set of tools, but he still has to observe what is happening. He's got to make a guess, he's got to test it. Sometimes he realizes that he's wrong. And Rocky is doing the same thing, but from a completely different scientific background. They've got different technologies, different assumptions, and completely different bodies, but they can work together because they are both looking at the same physical problem and trying to understand it. I think that's one of the things that the film presents really well. It doesn't just show science as like knowing facts. It shows it as a process of working something out. So many people misunderstand what science is. I wish that we could do a better job at helping people understand that it is all about curiosity and exploration. Now, when it does come to the actual science, this is still science fiction. We are not expecting every part of it to be true or accurate. Now, I think Andy Weir did a really good job of creating a threat that feels scientifically plausible enough to be able to take it seriously. Like, astrophage is this fictional thing, obviously, but the danger it's creating is very real. So what it's doing is it's affecting how much sunlight reaches Earth, and that would be, of course, an absolute disaster for us. We rely on sunlight for so many things like climate, agriculture, photosynthesis, ecosystems. Pretty much the entire structure of life on Earth depends on a steady input of energy from the sun. So if that energy starts dropping, even by a relatively small amount, it would have a huge effect on our ability to survive. Now, I immediately read it as an analogy for climate change, but Andy Weir has made some comments recently that, to me, I would deem slightly controversial and I might not be entirely pleased with. He has said that he does not deliberately put political messaging into his stories, and that if people see those things in them, that it is coming from the reader. That's a fine statement to make. Science fiction is essentially about society and our interaction with it, and it's inherently political because everything in life is political, and anyone who says they keep politics out of it doesn't understand what politics is or why it exists in our society. Anyway, we read stories. We make up our own minds about what we're taking from them. For me, a slowly developing global threat the scientists can see coming while governments are forced to decide how seriously to take it and what they are willing to do about it was obviously going to make me think about climate change. Now, I've seen some complaints as well about the accuracy of the science when it comes to astrophage and Rocky's biology, and I think that that is an insane complaint. It is so stupid. We're talking about science fiction, you guys, and a fictional alien species. We cannot create an accurate representation of an alien species because, despite what some people say, we've never met one. All we can do is propose ideas. Now, you can disagree with the particular idea that they use, and you can say that you personally do not think alien life would evolve like that. That is fine. But how would you know? The story is simply taking what we do know and then extrapolating beyond it in order to create something new. We have to allow science fiction to do that. There is a difference between inventing something in an area where we genuinely do not know the answer versus taking something that we already know and understand and then claiming that it behaves in a completely different way. Like, if you tell me that normal quantum entanglement allows faster than light communication, I am going to have an argument with you because we understand that process well enough to know that it does not do that. But if you tell me that alien life evolved under completely different atmospheric conditions with a different biology and access to materials we have never seen, that is fair game as far as I am concerned. We do not know what alien life looks like. We do not know what kinds of materials might exist on another planet or what an advanced alien civilization might be able to manufacture. That does not mean that you have to believe that Rocky's biology is exactly how alien life would work. It just means you judge it as science fiction. Does the story establish the rules? Does it follow those rules? And then does it use the fictional biology and technology consistently? That is a much more useful approach than just saying, well, it isn't accurate. You know, the same applies to the arguments that I've seen from people about the xenonite. We're not even going to talk about the balanced centrifuge. There is such a thing as self-balancing centrifuges, you guys. Now, the xenonite argument is because it does things that materials on Earth cannot do. But again, it is fiction. Materials behave differently under different pressures, temperatures, and atmospheric conditions. We are constantly developing new materials ourselves. Like, we can create new elements. They might not necessarily be stable, and we are still discovering new ways to combine and manipulate the things that we already have, but we can do these things. So the idea that an alien species might have access to a material that we do not have, or might know how to create and stabilize something that we can't, is not a problem for me. Like, you do not have to believe xenonite is secretly sitting somewhere waiting to be discovered. You just have to accept that the story is positing a fictional material and then it is using it consistently in the way that they have described the fictional material works. That is what science fiction is allowed to do. We shouldn't be asking if every invented thing in the story already exists or can exist. We should be checking whether the film understands the difference between science speculation and nonsense. Project Hail Mary gives me exactly what I want from science fiction. I liked the book. I understand why people absolutely love the book, and I appreciate what Andy Weir does with science and problem solving. But the film gave me the parts of the story that I personally responded to the most. The spaceships, the atmosphere, the problem solving, the optimism, the relationship between Grace and Rocky. That's what I wanted to see on the screen. That's what I got. It also presented scientists as people. Grace is clever, but he's frightened. He puts himself down a lot. He's got some imposter syndrome. It's fairly common. He has to work things out rather than simply just knowing the answer because he's like the scientist character. Rocky may be an alien with a different scientific culture, but he and Grace find a way to work together because they're both trying to understand the same physical problem. The science shapes the story, but the characters and the relationship are at the heart of it. And I also just think it's such a really lovely, optimistic comfort movie. But let me know what you thought. Book, movie, or both? Like, what are you scoring it? What's your favorite part of the book, and then what's your favorite part of the movie? One of my favorite things about the book was Rocky constantly being amazed at just how dumb Grace was. I really thought that it was really funny, and it was very friends taking the piss out of each other coded. In the movie then, some of my favorite bits were obviously the petroboscope scene. That was so beautifully stunning. But one thing that I think was played so well, and it still is the scene that just sits with me, and it's Strat singing Sign of the Times. It fits so perfectly. It was such a great choice. Anyway, that is all for this episode. I am currently reading The Dog Stars, which I will be reviewing next week, and I am also finally watching season 1 of Dark Matter on Apple TV. Full watch along and reaction videos of each episode of Dark Matter are available on memberships and Patreon, and the review for the TV series will be out soon before season 2 comes out. Now, I have already previously made a video on the science of communicating with aliens in Project Hail Mary, which you can watch here if you haven't already, or you can check out the full review playlist. Full disclosure, I'm still working on updating this. And let me know what sci-fi you are currently watching and reading. Stay nerdy.
Call it fist bump, by the way. Fist my bump. No, it's fist bump. It's not the same.